In a world of wealth and power, where lives can be traded in the blink of an eye, one man's arrogance pushed the limits of human dignity. A muscular black executive, known for his ruthless deals and unmatched fortune, walked into a secret auction where desperate women were sold like possessions. But when he raised his hand and claimed one of them as his own, no one could have imagined the shocking humiliation he would unleash. What began as an act of dominance would soon unravel into a story filled with betrayal, unexpected emotions, and a truth that would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring and emotional stories like this one straight to you. The underground auction hall pulsed with an atmosphere that was both suffocating and intoxicating. Hidden beneath the marble floors of one of Dubai's oldest hotels, the room was cloaked in velvet curtains and lined with gilded chandeliers, their golden light bouncing off polished tables where the world's most powerful men sat in silence. The air smelled of cigars, whiskey, and expensive cologne, wealth dripping from every corner. But beneath the glamour lay something darker. Lives reduced to numbers, women reduced to property, and dignity reduced to the highest bid. Malik Al-Karim, a 38-year-old Arab executive with a reputation carved in both the corporate world and the shadows of high society, stood out in the crowd not only because of his money but because of his presence. At 6'3", his frame looked sculpted from stone, each muscle defined beneath the tailored black shirt that stretched across his broad chest. His dark eyes scanned the room like a hawk circling its prey. He had built empires out of oil, real estate, and technology. He was the kind of man who bought companies with the same ease other men bought suits. But tonight, he wasn't here for business. He was here to remind himself of his power. When the auctioneer's gavel struck the podium, the room went silent. Lot number 17, the man announced, his voice echoing off the marble walls. The curtains pulled back, and there she was, Amara. Her wrists were bound loosely, not in chains but in silk ribbons, as if to disguise the cruelty of the spectacle. She was tall, slender but not fragile, with deep brown skin that gleamed under the stage lights. Her eyes, wide, searching, and filled with something between fear and defiance, swept across the crowd. Amara was no stranger to struggle. She had grown up in Nairobi, her childhood marked by loss and resilience, and had come to the Gulf chasing work, chasing survival. Instead, she found herself here, standing before men who saw her as nothing more than a transaction. The bidding began. Voices rose, numbers climbed, but Malik didn't move. He simply leaned back, his jaw set, watching the frenzy build. Other men, older, weaker, drunk with money, fought over her as if she were a prize to display. Amara's chest rose and fell rapidly, but her gaze landed on Malik. There was something about his stillness, his control, that unnerved her more than the shouting men. And then, like a storm cutting through silence, Malik's voice thundered, 1 million. The hall froze. The other bidders dropped their paddles, the numbers they had shouted suddenly meaningless. $1 million for a woman. The gavel slammed down. Sold, the auctioneer declared, his grin wide, his greed satisfied. Malik stood, his presence alone enough to part the crowd as he moved toward the stage. Amara flinched as he approached, his height and strength towering over her. He reached out not gently but not violently either, and took hold of her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. You belong to me now, he said, his voice low, sharp, a blade cutting into her pride. Her lips trembled, but then something flickered in her gaze. It wasn't submission, it was fire. I am not your possession, she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Malik's mouth curved into a cold smile. To the crowd it looked like dominance. But inside, something shifted. He wasn't used to resistance. He wasn't used to being told no. And yet, this defiance stirred something unexpected in him, a dangerous curiosity that unsettled his carefully constructed armor. He yanked the silk ribbon from her wrists, tossing it aside as though daring her to run. But she didn't. She stood her ground, her shoulders squared, her breath heavy but steady. The hall watched, confused. This wasn't how these auctions usually ended. Women bowed their heads, hid their shame. Amara lifted her chin. "Walk," Malik commanded. The two of them moved through the gilded corridors, the hush of whispers trailing behind. Outside, the night air wrapped around them, hot and thick with desert winds. Malik's chauffeur opened the door to a black Rolls-Royce, but before Amara stepped inside, she turned to him. "Why me?" she asked, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. Malik looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Because you dared to look at me," he replied. Her stomach tightened. She had stared at him, yes, but not with desire. With defiance. And yet he had twisted it into possession. As the car sped through the glittering streets of Dubai, Amara's mind raced. Every tower of glass and steel that flew past felt like a reminder of the power he held and the cage she had just been pulled into. Malik leaned back in his seat, silent, his eyes occasionally drifting toward her. She refused to meet his gaze. But then, as the city lights faded into the quiet stretch of desert highway, Malik spoke again. "You think I bought you to own you," he said, his voice softer now, though still edged with authority. "But you'll soon understand, I never buy anything I don't intend to test." Amara's heart pounded. The word hung in the air like a threat, like a promise, like something far more complicated than humiliation. The car slowed, the palace gates opening ahead of them. Malik's estate stretched across the horizon, a fortress of marble and gold against the night sky. Amara's breath caught, not from awe but from the weight of what lay before her. This was no home. This was a kingdom. And she was its newest prisoner. Yet deep in her chest, beyond the fear and uncertainty, a voice whispered, "This story is not over. He may have bought my body, but my spirit is not for sale." And Malik, though he wouldn't admit it, felt the echo of that truth burn into him as he stepped out of the car, offering her a hand she refused to take. The gates closed behind them with a finality that sounded like fate itself. The palace was unlike anything Amara had ever seen. Golden pillars rose like giants into ceilings painted with frescoes of ancient battles and desert landscapes. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over polished marble floors that stretched endlessly, reflecting the echoes of her hesitant footsteps. Servants in crisp uniforms bowed silently as Malik led her deeper inside, their eyes darting to her with curiosity but quickly dropping again in fear of their master. Amara wanted to scream. Every inch of the palace seemed designed to remind her of power, of wealth, of control. It was overwhelming, suffocating, and yet she refused to show weakness. Her chin stayed high, even as her heart pounded. Malik walked ahead, his stride slow but deliberate, as if daring her to try to fall behind. His broad shoulders filled the space, his presence dominating even the grandest halls. At last, he stopped before a set of carved double doors. With a push, the doors swung open, revealing a chamber that belonged in a dream or a nightmare. The room was vast, its walls lined with silk drapes in shades of crimson and gold. At its center stood a bed, enormous and canopied, dressed in fabrics finer than anything she had ever touched. A balcony opened out to the desert, where the moonlight painted the sand silver. Malik turned to her, his dark eyes studying every flicker of her expression. "This is yours," he said. His voice was calm, but the edge in it carried 1,000 unspoken meanings. Amara blinked. "Mine?" she asked, her tone biting. He stepped closer. "Do not mistake generosity for kindness," he replied. "You live here now because I allow it." She felt the sting of humiliation, but fire rose in her chest. "I didn't ask to be here. You bought me like an object. You think this palace makes me grateful? It doesn't. It makes me sick." His jaw tightened. For the first time that night, something cracked in his composure. No one had ever spoken to Malik al-Karim like this. Not partners, not rivals, not even family. Yet here she was, a woman he had pulled from the clutches of an auction, daring to challenge him in his own home. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy as stone. Then Malik's lips curved into something halfway between a smirk and a snarl. "You have courage," he said slowly, "that will either save you or destroy you." He left her with those words, turning sharply on his heel. The door slammed shut behind him, and she was alone in the gilded chamber. Amara sank onto the edge of the massive bed, her fists clenched, her chest heaving. She had been humiliated, yes, but she would not be broken. Malik stalked through the halls, his mind a storm. Rage burned in him, but beneath it was something more dangerous, intrigue. He had bought Amara to remind himself of his power, to crush someone's will and prove again that he was untouchable. Instead, her defiance ignited a fire he hadn't expected. He couldn't stop replaying her words, "You bought me like an object." The memory unsettled him. Because she was right. He poured himself a glass of whiskey in his study, the amber liquid trembling slightly in his hand. The walls were lined with books, volumes of history, philosophy, and economics, his trophies of intellect to match his empire of wealth. Yet tonight, the words blurred before his eyes. All he could see was the fire in Amara's gaze. He set the glass down with a thud. "She thinks she can resist me," he muttered. "She'll learn." But deep down, a voice he refused to acknowledge whispered, "Or maybe you will learn from her." The next morning, the palace was alive with motion. Servants carried trays of fruits, breads, and rich coffee into Amara's room. She ignored them, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the balcony. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of gold beneath the rising sun. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it mocked her. When Malik entered, the servants scattered instantly. He was dressed in a sharp-tailored suit, his cufflinks glinting in the morning light. His authority filled the room like a second sunrise. "You will eat," he ordered. Amara crossed her arms. "I'll eat when I choose." His brow furrowed, but he sat across from her at the table, his movements slow, deliberate. He poured coffee into 2 cups and slid one toward her. "You have spirit," he said. "But spirit without discipline is chaos." She looked at him, incredulous. "Discipline? You mean submission? You want me to bow, to thank you for turning my life into a cage?" His fingers tapped the rim of his cup. "And yet," he said softly, "you sit here. You argue with me instead of running. Why?" Her throat tightened. Because he was right, she hadn't run. She could have tried last night, could have screamed or fought harder. But something about him, his power, his contradictions, had rooted her to the ground. And she hated herself for it. "I stay," she said finally, "because leaving this palace doesn't erase what you did. You still bought me. You still humiliated me. Nothing changes that." Malik's gaze darkened. But behind it was a flicker of something almost vulnerable. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Then change it," he said. Her breath caught. For a moment, the world seemed to still. His words weren't a command, they were a challenge. Before she could respond, the door burst open. A servant stumbled inside, his face pale with fear. "Sir, there's been an incident at the oil fields," he stammered. "The workers are refusing to continue unless their demands are met. The situation is escalating quickly." Malik rose, his expression hardening into the mask of a leader. But as he turned to leave, his eyes lingered on Amara. For the first time, she saw something beyond arrogance, something that looked almost like doubt. And in that moment, Amara realized something that chilled her. Malik's empire might be powerful, but it was not invincible. And if his empire was fragile, maybe his heart was too. The convoy of black SUVs thundered through the desert roads, kicking up trails of dust that blurred the horizon. Malik sat in the back seat of the lead vehicle, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes fixed on the endless sands rushing by. His phone buzzed constantly, aides and managers feeding him updates from the oil fields. Words like strike, violence, and losses lit up the screen. Amara sat beside him, her hands clasped in her lap. She hadn't expected him to bring her. Yet when Malik prepared to leave the palace, he ordered, "She comes with me." His staff exchanged confused glances but obeyed without question. Now she sat in silence, the rumble of the engines and the heat of his presence making it impossible to think clearly. "Why am I here?" she finally asked. Malik's gaze didn't move from the window. "Because you will see," he said. "You will see what it means to hold power. To lead men who would rather tear you down than build with you." Amara's heart raced. She wanted to challenge him again, to remind him that power built on fear was nothing but weakness. but the intensity in his voice silenced her. For the first time, she wondered if being beside him wasn't just punishment, but protection. The oil fields spread before them like a battlefield. Dozens of workers gathered at the gates, their faces angry, their fists raised. Smoke from burning tires curled into the air, stinging eyes and filling lungs. Placards written in Arabic and English shouted demands: fair pay, safe conditions, justice. Malik stepped out of the SUV, his tailored suit catching the desert wind like a banner. Instantly, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to him, the man who controlled their livelihoods, the man who could crush them with a word. Amara followed, her sandals crunching against the gravel. The worker's eyes flicked to her, confusion sparking whispers. Who was she, standing beside him in her simple dress while he radiated authority? Malik raised a hand, and the crowd quieted further. His voice boomed across the field, steady and commanding. You dishonor yourselves, he declared. While you shout and burn, the world moves on without you. The oil flows elsewhere. Your children go hungry while you play with fire. Murmurs rippled through the workers, anger igniting again. A man stepped forward, his face lined with years of labor under the desert sun. We break our backs for you, Malik al-Karim. And you feast while we starve. We will not return until you treat us as men, not dogs. Amara's heart twisted. The man's voice carried raw pain, the kind of pain no palace gold could silence. She looked at Malik, expecting fury. Instead, she saw something startling: hesitation. For a brief moment, Malik's mask slipped. His lips pressed together, his eyes narrowing not with rage but with thought. Amara realized she was watching him wrestle with himself. He could crush this rebellion with soldiers, with money, with threats. But deep down, perhaps he knew that true power wasn't fear, it was respect. Amara stepped forward before she could stop herself. The crowd gasped, and Malik's eyes flashed with warning. But she ignored him. Listen to him, she said, her voice carrying. You sit in palaces and call them dogs, but their sweat built your empire. Without them, your power is nothing. A dangerous silence fell. Malik's men shifted uneasily, hands on their weapons. The workers stared at her, astonished that anyone would dare speak such words in front of him. Malik's jaw tightened. He moved to her side, his voice low, sharp. You forget yourself. But Amara met his gaze, defiance burning. No, I remember myself. And maybe you should remember who you were before this empire swallowed you. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. Malik's breath caught in his chest, fury and fascination colliding. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not even his closest advisors. Yet her words pierced deeper than he wanted to admit. The man who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. If you are the leader you claim to be, prove it, he challenged. Stand with us. Yes. Give us dignity. Malik's men bristled, but Malik lifted a hand to silence them. His gaze swept over the workers, their eyes full of desperation and fire. He looked at Amara, her face fierce with conviction. And for the first time, he felt the weight of a choice he couldn't ignore. Bring your representatives inside, Malik said finally. His voice was steady, but quieter now, almost reluctant. We will speak. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Some cheered, others doubted, but the fire of rebellion dimmed slightly. The workers began to select leaders to enter the compound. Amara exhaled, her heart pounding. She had expected him to crush the rebellion, to humiliate the workers further. Instead, he had yielded, just enough to open a door. Hours later, in the field's administrative office, Malik sat across from the workers' representatives. Numbers and demands were laid on the table. Tension crackled like electricity, but Malik listened. His replies were sharp, calculated, but not dismissive. He bargained, he threatened, but he also conceded in ways no one expected. Amara watched from the corner, her chest tight. For all his arrogance, for all his cruelty, Malik was proving something she hadn't imagined possible. He could change. When the negotiations ended, the workers left with cautious hope. Malik stood at the window, his hands behind his back, staring at the desert stretching endlessly beyond. You made me weak today, he said finally, his voice quiet. Amara stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. No. You made yourself stronger. Fear crumbles. Respect lasts. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, his lips curved, not into a smirk, but into something gentler. You may be more dangerous than my enemies, he said. Her heart raced, but she held his gaze. Then you should stop underestimating me. The silence between them pulsed with something unspoken, something neither of them was ready to name. But as the desert's sun bled into the horizon, one thing was certain: the walls Malik had built around himself were beginning to crack. The palace halls gleamed with golden chandeliers and polished marble, but Malik walked through them with a storm in his chest. The workers' rebellion had been quieted, but whispers now trailed him everywhere. Some praised his willingness to negotiate, but others, his own advisors, called it weakness. In the mirrored walls of the great corridor, Malik saw his own reflection, the powerful executive draped in luxury, yet a man who had bent when others expected him to crush. His jaw tightened. Weakness was a scent that invited predators. Amara followed several paces behind, her simple dress stark against the extravagance. She had been silent since the meeting, though her presence alone felt louder than any accusation. Malik stopped suddenly and turned, his eyes piercing hers. You think you've won, he said coldly. Her brows furrowed. This isn't about winning. It's about survival, for them, for you. You gave them a chance to breathe. That's not defeat. His lips curled into a bitter smile. You don't understand this world. They see concession as blood in the water. My board will question my authority. Rivals will wait for me to stumble. And yet, Amara replied softly, they still follow you. Because somewhere inside, they see the man you could be. Her words stung more than he expected. He turned sharply and strode toward the council chamber, unwilling to let her gaze unravel him. The chamber was already filled when he arrived. Rows of advisors in crisp suits rose to greet him, their faces carefully composed. But Malik saw it, the doubt in their eyes, the hunger for opportunity. Seated at the head of the long mahogany table, Malik's uncle, Tariq, waited. His hair was gray, his frame lean but still sharp with authority. Tariq had been the one to mentor Malik in the ruthless ways of business. Now his expression was a mask of disapproval. You negotiated with laborers, Tariq said flatly, not even offering a greeting. Malik sat at the opposite end of the table, his movements deliberate, controlled. I resolved a crisis without bloodshed. The fields will run again. Temporarily, Tariq snapped. You showed them weakness. You showed all of us weakness. An empire is not built on sympathy, Malik. It is built on control. The room murmured in agreement. Malik's fists tightened under the table. He had expected resistance, but the venom in his uncle's tone cut deep. You taught me control, Malik said evenly. And control is not always force. Sometimes it is knowing when to bend so you do not break. Tariq leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You are not bending, nephew. You are breaking. And if you continue down this path, you will not only destroy yourself, you will destroy us all. After the meeting dissolved in heated arguments, Malik stormed into the palace courtyard, his chest heaving with suppressed rage. The night air was cooler, scented with jasmine from the gardens, but it did nothing to calm him. Amara was already there, standing by the fountain. She looked up as he approached, her expression cautious. They think you're weak, she said quietly. He stopped, his voice like steel. They forget who I am. No, she countered. They know exactly who you are. That's why they fear what you're becoming. Malik's eyes narrowed. And what am I becoming, Amara? Tell me. She stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. A man who could lead with more than fear. A man who could inspire instead of intimidate. That terrifies them, because if you change, their power changes too. For a long moment he said nothing. His chest rose and fell, and something burned behind his eyes, anger, conflict, maybe even doubt. You risk too much speaking to me like this, he said finally, his voice low. You risk too much ignoring it, she replied. Their words hung in the air like the edge of a blade. Malik turned sharply and walked toward the stables, needing space from the storm she stirred inside him. The desert night was alive with whispers. Malik rode alone across the sands, the moon casting a silver glow over the dunes. But he wasn't alone for long. Two figures emerged from the shadows, riding hard to intercept him. They wore scarves over their faces, weapons glinting in the moonlight. Rival mercenaries, sent, perhaps, by those who wanted Malik to fall. His horse reared as they blocked his path. One raised a blade. The desert has no mercy for the weak, Al-Karim. Malik's eyes hardened. They would learn otherwise. With a swift motion he dismounted, pulling a knife from his belt. The clash was brutal raw. Dust rose around them as steel met steel, the echoes of battle swallowed by the endless night. Malik fought with the fury of a man who had everything to lose. When the sand settled, both attackers lay beaten, groaning in the dirt. Malik stood over them, chest heaving, his blade dripping under the moonlight. His body ached, but his spirit burned hotter than ever. Weakness? He was still a lion. But the question clawed at him, was Amara right? Could strength mean something more than this endless cycle of dominance and fear? When he returned to the palace, dawn was breaking. The first light painted the marble walls in shades of gold and rose. Amara stood at the steps, worry etched across her face. "You're hurt," she whispered, seeing the cuts on his arm. He shook his head. They failed. Her eyes searched his, desperate. "And how many more will try? Malik, can't you see? They're not just coming for your empire. They're coming for you." For a moment, he almost reached for her, drawn to the fire in her gaze. But pride forced his hands to his sides. "I cannot be anything less than what I am," he said hoarsely. Her voice softened, but her words cut deep. "Maybe it's time you decide who you want to be, not who they demand you to be." Malik turned away, the dawn spilling over his shoulders. His empire was at war with itself, and so was he. The palace, with all its marble columns and glittering chandeliers, had never felt so hollow. Malik sat alone in his private study, the night pressing heavy against the tall windows. Papers were scattered across the desk, ledgers, contracts, reports, but his eyes lingered on none of them. His thoughts were consumed by one thing, the whispers of betrayal. Earlier that day, his uncle Tariq had confronted him again, this time with venom that could not be mistaken. "If you continue to let that woman influence you," Tariq had hissed, "you will not just lose the empire, you will lose everything. She will be your ruin." But Malik's heart ached in a way that power and empire could not silence. Amara's presence had forced him to face questions he had buried his entire life. Questions about what true strength meant, and what kind of man he wanted to be. That night, Amara stood at the edge of the courtyard, the desert breeze tugging at her hair. She had heard the raised voices, the slamming of doors. She knew Malik was being pushed into a corner. Part of her wanted to leave, to escape before she was crushed under the weight of his world. But part of her, the part that had seen glimpses of the man beneath the armor, refused to abandon him. When he finally emerged from the study, his steps were heavy, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. "They want me to end this," he said, his voice low, his jaw tight. "To prove to them that I can still control what is mine. Do you know what that means?" Amara's throat tightened. "It means me." Silence stretched between them. He didn't deny it. The next morning, the council gathered. Tariq sat smugly at the head, waiting for his nephew to make the declaration that would strip away the last trace of compassion from his rule. Malik entered, robes immaculate, posture commanding, but his eyes betrayed the war raging inside him. Amara was brought in as well, escorted by guards. She held her head high, though her hands trembled slightly. "Today," Tariq said to the room, "we will see if Malik al-Karim is still fit to rule." The chamber buzzed with anticipation. Malik stood, his gaze sweeping the room. He could feel every eye, every breath pressing down on him. And then he looked at Amara. She met his gaze without fear, her eyes shimmering with both defiance and something else, hope. Malik's chest rose with a deep breath. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "You question my strength," he said, his tone steady. You believe that compassion is weakness. But I tell you this, an empire built on fear alone crumbles the moment the people stop fearing. An empire built on respect endures. Tariq shot to his feet. You dare defy me? You dare choose her over everything we built? Malik turned fully toward his uncle, his voice rising with conviction. I do not choose her over this empire. I choose her to remind me what this empire should mean. If leadership is only domination, then I want no part of it. But if leadership is the courage to protect even those with no power, then that is the strength I will carry. Gasps filled the chamber. Some faces turned pale, others lit with something resembling admiration. Amara's lips parted, tears brimming in her eyes. Tariq's face twisted with rage. You are no leader. You are a fool blinded by a woman. Malik stepped closer, his towering presence silencing the chamber. No, uncle. I am a man who has finally opened his eyes. And I see now, your way is the true weakness. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. Then Tariq, shaking with fury, stormed from the chamber. The council erupted in murmurs, some outraged, others emboldened. Malik had crossed a line that could never be erased. When the chamber emptied, Amara approached him slowly. Her voice trembled. You risked everything. For me. Malik exhaled, the weight of his decision finally crashing down. Not just for you. For myself. For the man I needed to become. She reached for his hand, hesitant at first, then firm. Then maybe you've already won more than any empire could give you. For the first time in years, Malik allowed himself to smile. A real smile, not the calculated mask he wore in public. His hand tightened around hers. That night, he led her to the palace balcony. The desert stretched endlessly, the stars scattering silver light across the dunes. Amara leaned against the railing, the wind playing in her hair. Malik stood beside her, no longer the untouchable executive but a man stripped bare of excuses. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, he admitted. There will be enemies, betrayals, struggles. But tonight, I know this. You are no slave. You are no pawn. You are the reason I will fight to be better. Her eyes softened, filling with tears that finally spilled down her cheeks. She whispered, and you are the reason I believe in hope again. They stood there, the palace behind them, the desert before them. Two souls from different worlds bound by pain, courage, and something neither had dared to imagine, love. For Malik, it was not the end of his empire. It was the beginning of his humanity.